40 to 47, mate.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Right, so Mark chapter 15, starting at verse 40. Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James the younger and of Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. It was preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath. So as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council, who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So Joseph bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in the linen, and placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid.
If there's not enough there, let me know that I'll photocopy some more. Now, I'm a little bit nervous being up here, and it's good to be nervous when you're preaching, I think, to know that what you're saying has weight. But we're going through a passage which we've done 1,000 times because we do it every Easter. I feel like we've got a precious gift in front of us, and the more I scratch, the more gold you find underneath. Ever feel that when you're going through the scriptures? That you can read something 1,000 times, you think you know it so well, but then all of a sudden just there's more to it. There's something more precious underneath it. It's a common thing in stories, and I was listening to a podcast last night about a lady who was the daughter of missionaries. When she was from Australia, when she was 5, her parents decided they were going to go to Niger, I think it is, to become missionaries, where they speak French, apparently. So in order to do so, they first had to go to France to learn French. So as a 5-year-old was dragged out of her comforts of home and taken to France. For a year, spent a year learning French and became very fluent at it, but had no friends there because she was Australian and the Americans wouldn't hang out with her. I don't know. What have they got against Aussies? Gee. And then at the age of 6, was put into a boarding school at Nigeria, where she knows absolutely nobody, and spent her childhood there to the age of 15. And sometimes I listen to this story and I go, what are you doing? Like, that's a tough gig to send your kids away for a whole period of time. I mean, they come home for holidays and stuff, but for the kids, she just said she would never do that to her kids. And I feel that's a hard gig, but it's not till mid-20s when she was doing a talk with her father in front of a university of students, and someone asked the question, tell us or explain a bit about that time where you were sent away to boarding school, and I want the perspective of the daughter and the perspective of the father. And it wasn't to that stage there that both of them broke down, because the father felt the weight of it but never expressed it to his daughter, and his daughter felt the resentment of it but had never heard the reason from the father. Sometimes we go through life and things happen and they're weighty. And as they're weighty, we go, what, God, are you doing in this situation? And sometimes it's not till further down the track that we understand what God's on about. Have you ever experienced that? Because I think in this story, there's a bunch of people experiencing that. What is going on? That this guy we've been following around for 3.5 years, who's declared himself to be the Son of God, and the Messiah, the one who's going to set us free, has now just been crucified on a cross. What is the go with this God? What did we do for the last 3.5 years? Was that a waste of time? Were we in the wrong camp? What's happening? So I want to look at this story here, and the bit I want to focus on, what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to look at why the details are important of this little passage. And then we're going to look at the bit that isn't there. Because I think it's the bit that isn't there that's one of the most important parts of this passage. So, let's get stuck into it. We're starting from verse 40, mainly because Gary didn't go to verse 40 last week, so we had to cover it somewhere. In fact, we're going to cover more of it next week rather than this week. But verse 40, it's all about the fact there's documented details that give proof as to the death of Jesus. There are witnesses. And it's not just, there was a bunch of people who saw it happen. There are witnesses who are named. Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, Salome. And then it goes on and says in verse 41, and many other women who had come were there also. There are all these witnesses as to the crucifixion of Jesus. We have Joseph of Arimathea, who's it says a prominent member of the council. That means he's a prominent member of the Sanhedrin, who is a witness, who comes and asks Pilate for the body and takes the body and buries it. In other Gospels, it also says that Nicodemus is there with him. Remember Nicodemus? Yeah, particularly in John, I think Nicodemus is. And the encounters he has with Jesus. It says that Joseph has to go and approach Pilate. So if you're going to listen to somebody's word, Pilate's a pretty good word to look to. And even Pilate doesn't believe the reports of what's happening with Jesus, that Jesus already died, so he talks to the centurion. Centurions are pretty trustworthy, even though they're pretty rough. But there's all these people who are witnesses to what's going on. And then in verse 47, they bury him, and then it says that Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. There's all these witnesses to what's going on. Jesus, yes, he definitely was crucified on a cross. There's these witnesses that point to it. He definitely was dead. Pilate double-checked this to make sure that he was dead. He asked the centurion who was there at the foot of the cross. He's the one who cries out, and he's the one who says, surely this man was the Son of God. Yes, he was there. Jesus is dead. Was he actually buried? Yes, he was actually buried. He's buried by this man Joseph, who was a pretty high-standing fellow. And there were women who noticed where he was laid. So sometimes you get people say, he wasn't actually dead. Or maybe they lost the place where he was buried. Maybe they went to the wrong tomb. All these things. And there's all this passage here saying, well, here's documented proof. In an historical argument, there is documented proof. Other things. It says the tomb, he was laid in a tomb. It doesn't just say he was laid in any tomb. He was laid in a tomb that was carved out of a rock. That's a pretty descriptive comment, isn't it? If you're just going to say he died and he was buried. No, he was died and it was a tomb carved out of rock. We know that the tomb was made